This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders.
Habits, once built, can be hard to kick. Whether it's Eddie Jones saying the word may, Argentina never winning 2 games in a row, or Manny Lebok finding it hard to kick, rugby has shown us time after time that sometimes, like a particularly sweaty nun, you just can't seem to get out of a habit. This Saturday evening, England took on the Springboks in a match defined by 2 teams living out trends, expectations growing manifest as 2 similar yet also separate sides gave us a fascinating showcase of who they are, what they are, and perhaps most importantly, what they simply must always do and what they simply must never cannot do. The Springboks, in the end, falling back on the one habit that's always defined them over the last 5 years: winning. So, how did the Boks produce their first ever win at the glorious Allianz Stadium, as we all definitely call it, and just their second win over England in the Twickenham postcode in a decade? And for all the soul-searching and endless questioning, what is going on with England this autumn? Angleterre and Afrique du Sud are the 2 teams in international rugby who play the most aggressive defence, and that raw anger created a pretty fascinating and spellbinding test match on Saturday night. Forget bespoke tactics, this was an evening for physicality, pressure and reaction, a who blinks first losers contest where instead of claps and stamps, you had to keep your eyes open with an Ibn Etzebeth or Chandler Cunning himself tumbling towards your face. And yet, for all the brutality it brought to life, this was ultimately a game destined to be remembered for the efforts of perhaps the 2 smallest players on the park. Man of the match and our hearts, Cheslin Colby, and from the very outset, perhaps the form player on the planet right now, the least bald man in London that Saturday, Marcus Smith. This is a brilliant, incredibly simple move ran from England's first set piece of the game. The Springboks have developed the most fearsome scrum in the whole of the rugby that they play, but a huge part of that comes down to how they commit all 8 men to shove on pretty much every single ball. And that's what England look to exploit here. They keep the ball in the scrum just long enough to make the Boks believe a turnover penalty might be on their way, and then spin it out. England and Van Porfley are also very aware the Boks love the 9 to go full Nick Farr-Jones, with Williams diving on JVP's back as the ball becomes playable. And hence, when he hits Freeman, tight to the scrum, he runs an outwards line with Lawrence on his shoulder. As Khaleesi and Williams are both committed to the scrum, it gives a one-on-one carry against Lebok, and Freeman rides right over the top. Diolande sucked in to help his 10 out. Khaleesi is pretty quick to his aid, but this has a huge knock-on effect. Creel, hence, has also dipped in to help Diolande, and it means by the time the ball is out, recycled and into Smith's hands, Creel is now lined up as the 12 rather than the 13, and Stewart has come into the line to create the extra man. This gives Smith a simple scan. Whichever man Colby chooses to mark, Stewart or Slightholme here, he just gives it to the opposite. And with the wee winger watching Big Fred, he drops in a perfect low cross kick to Slightholme. This draws Farsi up from the backfield, allowing St. Boy to drop it on the toe in turn, putting huge pressure on Colby, who scuffs the kick horribly, giving England a huge net gain in territory and surely setting himself up for a pretty terrible performance at Twickenham. I'm sure that'll be the case. It's such a simple move that takes advantage of that Bok aggression beautifully, the desperation for both scrum dominance and line speed used against them for England's gain. And from there, England look to use South Africa's bulk against them again. This is a sneaky little nice move going over the top to Earl, with Underhill hitting a line on the inside here to exploit the Boks using slow boy low at the tail to lift at the back, meaning, much like an opponent Brian Habano once faced, I'm led to believe, he'd be slow to turn. However, 2 things happen. 1, referee Andrew Brace gets kind of in Underhill's way, and 2, Sia Khaleesi decides that Ben Earls are pretty tasty on toast and commits an actual murder. An actual death takes place on the Twickenham pitch. The old Bill, no, not that one, no doubt notified, and it just wrecks the move. However, thankfully for England, Earl's drop goes backwards, and it allows Slightholme instead to slide through some Springboks and gain that forward momentum they were looking for. England then run another simple play designed to just attack how the Boks defend, playing 2 phases infield before Smith notices this. With the Bok tacklers off their feet, Aranser has slipped into the main line, with Farsi now covering his wing, so Colby drops back into fullback, leaving Ox and Shea alone here watching the wing. Knowing Red Velvet don't win races, Smith switches back to that side, long ball to Slightholme, almost catching the Boks out. However, it's perhaps a split second too late. Colby having the time to adjust, and Slightholme doesn't hold his depth here. If he starts 5 meters deeper, he can catch this ball at full pace, but instead he stood still, and it gives Williams time to hunt him down. It leaves England on the wing with slower ball, and the next phase the Boks make a great tackle to get on top, and then again on the following phase, leading to Smith dropping back into pocket. 3 minutes on the clock, surely now 3 points on the board. England up to this point have now built a reputation over the Borthwick era for going for more drop goals than anyone else in the world, and so Peter Septoy and Ibn Etzebeth both fly up for the charge down. To charge down this sure drop goal attempt that's definitely coming. But much like a moment earlier, this opens an opportunity on the touchline. The Bok D is congested on this side, and it's left Etzebeth the only join before Colby on the far extreme. So when he flies up, Slade spots its open opportunity and lets his 10 know. Hearing this, Smith trusts and steps. Etzebeth is heading for his kicking foot on the far side for the charge down, so it means Smith can step early and use Etzebeth's trajectory against him. It leaves him for dead, and since Tiramisu don't win time trials, he can get on the outside of Ox, producing an insane bit of skill. This angle shows it brilliantly. His glance at Williams is so brief, calculating the exact split second he has to release the ball to fix him, leaving Slade and Slight home with a 2-on-1 against Colby in about 3 meters of space. It's brilliant core skills, and Slade's line here is unreal. The way he remains square, straight, forcing Colby to turn his shoulders before unleashing Slight home at the exact right moment, the winger leaving Colby grasping for air as he scores in the corner. However, that wasn't the only thing Cheslin Colby was grasping for, as he was also positively grasping for a website. And so, in order to alleviate this, he headed to Squarespace. Used to doing things fast, Cheslin Colby figured there was probably no web builder out there on the entire internet that could possibly keep up with him. And yet, that's when he discovered Squarespace, and particularly Squarespace's new design intelligence features, utilizing AI to build a website to his exact specifications in mere minutes. The whole thing loading, booting, and being put together to be personalized in the tiniest details in moments. Everything laid out for the behatted maestro to commandeer and personalize to his own end, adding endless features and ideas with both speed and efficiency. And if you want to experience some real design intelligence yourself, you can head to the link in the description and use the offer code SquidRugby to save yourself some yen, some rand, some pounds, some dollars, some currency of your choosing. It was indeed actually a pretty eventful game for Colby, probably inspired by his website escapades. This break is outstanding. England's defence is so aggressive, pushing up from the second defender out, with lots of lads in your face to try and create an error, but much like Australia last week, the Boks identify the weakness this leaves around the ruck, and put Colby in here as a forward runner on what looks to be a hard carry line, only for him to snap back towards the breakdown. George has remained at the base, and it means he's now essentially disconnected from his teammates, allowing Colby to snap his ankles and dart right through. A fantastic tackle by Freddie Stewart, saving what could have been a certain try in most situations. However, whilst they couldn't finish that one, the Boks were able to exploit this very same idea successfully in their opening try, scored in brilliant fashion by the man they call Grant Williams. Now, there's been a lot of criticism the last 2 weeks over England's decision to move into that all-or-nothing Bok-inspired aggressive defence, but Williams' try kind of provides ironic evidence in the opposite direction. That England's biggest problems are when they're not doing that. The Springboks try here to run another sneaky move off the line out with Aronson, but England likewise read it and get their defence up and running. Over the next few phases, they repeatedly force the Boks backwards on each phase, Lawrence stopping Etzebeth dead here. South Africa not crossing the gain line once, losing about 3 or 4 metres per carry every single phase. The England defence is totally on top, and it causes Le Bok to kick it away before things get worse. However, the kick is superb. In another world, Freeman or Stewart is in position here and takes the ball ahead of where the Boks originally threw into the line out, but instead it's Marcus Smith, and the Boks short king can outjump England to put South Africa back on the attack. It's frankly a really good bit of game management by Le Bok. He decides the kick is coming over a phase in advance and gives his teammates a chance to set him into perfect chase conditions. A bit like this one off a line out. Le Bok gets up to the gain line and the last second drops it on the toe, with Arensa leading the chase and 2 huge back rowers alongside. Henry Slade is slow to turn, giving the Boks a competitive advantage in rugby and business, meaning even when Freeman takes it flawlessly over Arensa's head, a la my hypothetical scenario a minute ago, Khaleesi and Willemse are set as backup to smash him and get over the ball, winning a penalty. That's essentially what the Boks are looking for here. As such, Khaleesi is in a wide position and allows the Boks to have really fast ball once Aronson wins it in the air. The Bok is looking wide immediately and wants the ball to spread it, but in a kind of fascinating twist, Williams gets a call from the blind side to overrule this, which comes not from a secondary playmaker, but Ahir Snyman. Harried into position post-kick, Earl and Freeman here have set the wrong way round, and it's a frankly brilliant spot by Snyman. As such, Earl shoots in on him from the outside, and Freeman has to drift, but being the wrong way round, Farsi is able to make some meters before Freeman gets there. Now, if these roles were reversed, Earl can just bounce back into line, but instead he heads back to his wing position and ends up having to wrap right around the breakdown to get out of the nine's way and avoid being penalised, and hence basically takes himself out of the game. It leaves England one body short in their main line. However, Will Stewart here then also decides to contest the ruck, which for me is a perfectly fine decision. There's only one guy over it, so he's got a decent chance of causing some chaos. He's just unfortunate that one guy happens to be Ahir Snyman, who is approximately the size of Cornwall, so Stewart's shove makes no impact other than to the English defence. If one of these two players fills into line, they take position here, and England can run their usual angry system. Cunningham himself flies out of line, Martin presses up, and Earl or Stewart is about to catch any stragglers. Instead, however, Cunningham himself flies out of line, Martin presses up, and is promptly isolated, left in no man's land without anyone properly on his inside, allowing Grant Williams to slip right through. Martin is positioned as the C defender, the third out, so sort of tries to run their aggressive role, but recognises last second he's technically the B defender because he's only the second guy, but in the C position, and so he tries to straddle both worlds, unsure what role he should be playing in the system, something Williams is incredibly alert to. He gets on the outside again with relative ease, and by the time Martin tries to adjust back inside, he's already gone. It's a brilliant spot. A great kick puts the England D into imperfect shape, Snyman's playmaking creates a stress tear, and then Williams just spots the prop disconnected from the next defender and blares right through. From here, it's a really smart finish. Most players' instinct would be to run at the gap here between Stewart and Smith, but instead, watch how Stewart runs in the lead up. Not expecting a break, he started tracking across to the far wing, but when Williams slides through, he has to turn his hips, then his entire body, and start rushing in on Williams. Total shift of momentum, kind of sideways, expecting him to go for the obvious space in front of him. But Williams instead runs at Stewart's outside, forcing him to turn back against himself. Hips, then body, a lovely step, getting him past the fullback, diving right under the bar to put the Springboks level in the game England, up to that point, had pretty much controlled. Because this is becoming the Springboks' latest habit. South Africa have always had what I'd call bullshit players, guys who can produce points from situations where nobody has any right, but where France and New Zealand, say, have contorted their entire game plan to get Dupont and Penno, or Talea, McKenzie and Barrett into positions to do that. South Africa had traditionally been so game plan oriented, the likes of Colby, Arensa and co got fewer opportunities than they would in a side like New Zealand or France, and yet the new structures Tony Brown has put in place serve two purposes. One, they can create small fractures in the defence for tries like Grant Williams's, but two, they can create scenarios such as the one that leads to Colby's second score. Straight up, this is just a terrible tackle by Ben Earl. And Slade figures, dude was our best player of Six Nations, he can definitely make a one-on-one tackle against a back, so starts to drift onto Creel and Pollard before realising, oh shit, no, he can't. But by that point, it's already too late. DDA is through and it's a brilliant break. But the scenario itself was just part of the Boks' new approach. Diolande was previously used on the attack as a ninth forward, but here he's deployed more as a second fly half, who can, depending on England's defence, become a battering ram. He smashes his way through, and once Stewart commits, fires the pass to unleash Colby down the wing. Freeman's worked hard to cover across, but it's an effort in vain. The tiny king of the world dancing around him and sprinting down the wing to score in the corner. 98 times out of 100, maybe Diolande is stopped here, and in a pretty high number of those, he's caught behind the gain line and forced backwards, but where 2 years ago, the Springboks would have seen that as a low percentage play and hence not worthy of being run, the genius of the new Boks system is they know how good their kicking game and their pack, especially as forward carriers, are, so they're happy to run it 100 times to get those two results that will result in 7 points each time, knowing their strengths make up for taking the odd risk here and there. And yet, for all their newfangled innovation, this was a very typical old-school Springbok performance. They fronted up physically and delivered tactically and allowed the rest to kind of take care of itself, knowing this England team were the biggest physical threat they'd faced all autumn. This, for instance, is brilliantly simple by Visa. England love to clear well beyond the breakdown to generate faster ball, open some gaps, pull extra tacklers in, and watching for it, he just waits for them to stroll past so he can just step in and steal the ball. Or the try scored by Peter Steph-Toy, the product of a kind of hilarious double charge down. It's all about pressure. Aronsa flies up here, leading to Itoje misjudging the ball slightly, meaning Earl takes it on the back foot instead of the lock. And hence, even though 4 England players enter this ruck, they're doing so on Springbok terms. The first 2 end up off their feet, leading to just a 2-person caterpillar, and England don't want to sacrifice anyone else from their chasing line to stick in here. You'd be going down to 9 or 8 players with 2 or 3 of them in the backfield. Etzebeth just lunges himself at Van Poortvliet's kicking foot brilliantly, timing it perfectly, and while Smith recovers extremely well, you can't account for Peter Steph-Toy, the weeping lamppost up in his face to make an equivalent effort before backing up, thanks to one, I will say, quite phenomenally lucky bounce for him to score the try. It's a classic case of the harder you work, the luckier you get. The Boks continuously putting themselves in situations for charge downs and pressure and creating these moments, and with the new blocking laws in place, they're able to get a massively increased number of them. Etzebeth's ability to spot the exact second Van Poortvliet lifts the ball is astonishing. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd spent the week studying JVP's body language when he picks it up, in particular, such as his knack for knocks. England did adapt. JVP here takes his backward step as he kicks and hangs a pretty pretty perfect effort that just highlights how important Etzebeth's efforts were, just what he was preventing each time he got in the way. However, perhaps the best setup England ran for a box kick actually came here, quite early on. One smash phase off a scrum, then they hit Jamie George on the carry right as he's leaving the scrum with the other South African forwards there as well, both acting as a surprise runner, and perfectly, he goes straight at Etzebeth and gets him on the floor making the tackle, meaning he won't be in position to charge it down when they kick moments later. Something Wales should probably be thinking about doing this weekend, alongside finding a new coach and probably non-soiled underwear after the anthems. The last 2 weeks haven't been vintage Springbok performances, some uncharacteristic indiscipline and moments of switching off, but for me, they're amongst the most important they've had outside of World Cups. The last cycle, the Boks were brilliant in the big games, but had a horrible habit of occasionally just falling off and losing smaller matches they really should have won. Their goal this time out is the old All Black aim of just dominating, of winning everything. The Boks usually play 12 games a year, and for the quality and depth they have, they should be winning at least 10 of those every year. These last 2 weeks, they showed their baseline performance. Their performances in matches where everything isn't firing flawlessly has moved up enormously since even last year, and especially back in 2022 or 21. To shut down a very good England and very good Scotland team so comprehensively in successive weeks with different changed teams is hugely impressive and shows just how far they've come. These are the sort of matches that a few years ago they would have been winning by 1 point or 2 points, or even losing. And yet, Rassie is clearly serious about the target of becoming an all-sided side as dominant as his vintage All Black teams, and they're starting to add, finally, that consistency. England, on the other hand, have had a really weird autumn, as some unlikely habits have begun to undercut their general performances. They got themselves back into the game brilliantly over that first half. Sam Underhill's try is fantastic. Never a traditional carrier, more a jackling and tackling threat. Since working under attack coach Lee Blackett at Bath, Underhill has really developed his ability to pick lines and angles, and he spots a peach here. Lowe here isn't even thinking about him. He's 2 guys out, he's not an option, he's so far out the picture, but Underhill sees something tiny here. Khaleesi is watching the fringe of the ruck here. However, right as he's about to bounce out and fill this gap, Ox gets back up to his feet. And so, Khaleesi holds in order to let his big buddy bounce into that zone. But, for the first time in his life, Siya Khaleesi fails to inspire somebody to do more than they thought possible. Nshay steps on Siya's foot and it causes both to stumble. And it's at this exact moment that Underhill accelerates, hitting the hole between the props and riding the big boy tackles over the try line. And yet, as we got into the second half, and then, perhaps most importantly, that now fabled last 15 minutes, England instead combusted. This dummy throw by Luke Cowan-Dickie is borderline unforgivable. This throwdown from Cunningham himself is atrocious, just lobbing the ball full pelt at the scrum half's feet. And on one of the rare opportunities they did go forwards, Cowan-Dickie is in a great wide position here with loads of space, but he's in front of Lawrence, making getting the ball to him actually impossible and forcing the centre to run himself. The entire quarter, England looked panicked, harried. Every carry, every phase here feels so desperate, totally lacking on composure. People picking the ball up and running and looking for just whatever's on rather than stopping and thinking and taking a breath. And this raises two issues, both coming back to the same source. Marcus Smith has been arguably the form player on the planet this autumn, and as such, Steve Borthwick's decisions to take him off or move him to fullback and bring on George Ford have been the main talking point of the English rugby media over the last few weeks. And yet, we saw on Saturday what England looked like without him. Compare what we were just looking at to the way they steadily kept their heads down and got back in the game against New Zealand, using smart attacking play and kicking game to manufacture 2 moments to win the match, both sliding just wide, but both easily could have turned that whole thing around. And then against Australia, yes, they really should have put the Wallabies to the sword by then, but after Kellaway gets the Aussies in front, Ford calls a play to bring the Wallaby back 3 up, creating space for the kick, which gives England the position from which they score the try to put them ahead with 90 seconds to go. Most teams would win it from there. If Itoshi had taken this restart, they probably do. There was none of that steady composure on Saturday. You cannot tell me, or if you do I won't believe you for a second, that Steve Borthwick's decision to keep George Ford on the bench had nothing to do with the fact that all the English rugby media has talked about for the last 2 weeks has been keeping Smith at 10. The media and particularly the fan pressure seem to have got to the coaching team, and yet it might just have bitten England on the backside. They slid into all sorts of errors and issues they simply haven't been making over the last few weeks. The other topic that the English rugby media keeps bringing up is they keep saying the team has a huge problem over these last 15 minutes. They have an issue closing out games, finding points in the dying stages. Something that, as I say, has been a massively overblown issue. They've got themselves into situations to win those games both times. It has not been half as big an issue as it's been made out to be. Until Saturday, where, having been asked over and over for successive weeks by every interviewer, every journalist, every fan on social media, what's your problem with the last 15 minutes? The moment the clock struck 65, England start playing their worst rugby of the year. No doubt informed by the fact they've been told for 2 straight weeks that was magically what's going to happen when they come into these stages. This England team are on the right track. They've been broadly excellent this year. Their performances against Ireland, France, and 3 times against New Zealand were that of a world-class team in the making. Yes, they're not quite there yet, and yes, they only won 1 of those, but that's where all those teams begin, by fronting up, delivering week on week, performing and being in the game against everyone and anyone, and slowly learning to turn those 2-point losses into 3-point wins. It takes a bit of time. The Australia game, like the Fiji match a year ago, was a blip, not unlike the Springboks had in games against Wales, Argentina, and Australia themselves over the last few years. Sometimes you just don't get up for a smaller side, you expect to be as much as a bigger team, or you get solidly ahead and you switch off a little. It's kind of human nature. Developing that consistency is a big part of learning to become a world-beating team, and it's one that the back-to-back world champion Springbok team are only properly overcoming now in 2024, having won 2 World Cups. This is just part of the journey England were on. And yet, 2 weeks ago, this English team looked about a year or so's worth of lessons away from joining New Zealand, South Africa and Ireland at the top of the tree. But now, with Borthwick second-guessing himself into keeping the fans happy, and the English rugby media convincing the players they're in crisis that something's majorly wrong, when really, they're just at the tricky bit of a pretty heady journey that's been clearly heading in the same direction ever since Borthwick got the job, that timeline has started to look slightly less clear. You're starting to ask, will England overcome these issues that have come from external doubts? And yet, perhaps it's just the old habits of those of us on the periphery of the game die also hard. Context is the enemy of crisis, enemy of a good narrative and story. And why should we listen to that when we can instead call for the coach's head? Saturday was arguably England's weakest performance of the year, and yet only 1 charge down here, and they're in a situation looking for a winning drop goal here in the last few minutes. It would have taken about 3 moments playing out ever so slightly differently. This ball bouncing differently here, this one flying an inch further here, this one being 4 inches to the left here, for the Rose Gang to be on for an unbeaten autumn against Japan this weekend. And yet, instead, if we bounce the ball or flight paths in the air differently, and England fans are sat watching a harried last 15 minutes, hoping this time these habits just don't stick. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the first thing we've got going up this weekend. No, second. We did a video on what Wales do next on our second channel.
More Squid Rugby.
There's going to be more going up on both. We're going to look at New Zealand versus France. However, Sky New Zealand have been taking down the videos over the last couple of weeks in a lot of territories and, blocking them and so on. So we're going to do it in a different format. We're going to do it in this lovely studio that we're in right now. So it's going to be a slightly different format to, hopefully get around that. And otherwise, there's going to be more rugby, isn't there?
Yeah, we're going to try and cover as many of the other international games as we physically can by talking about them again in the studio format on the More Squid Rugby channel. So you can go and look at that, only if you want to, though.
If you don't, then that's fine too. There'll be more next week that you hopefully will be more tempting for you.
And you can watch it with the new Wales coach, who's this guy.
That guy.
This little dragon called Di. He's the new Wales coach, so go enjoy rugby with him.
You know what he loves? Rugby.
Toje didn't gather it cleanly, but Saracens club mate Ben Earl was there.